All right, so today we're talking about how did Spain lose its position as the most powerful country in Europe. So this is going to be kind of pulling a little bit from what we were talking about in class about the French Civil War and about Philip II as a ruler and his kind of conflicts with Elizabeth and a little bit of Mary Queen of Scots. So first question is, how was Spain ruled in the 16th century? So we already know that Philip II was a major figure in Europe. He controlled the Western Habsburg Empire that he inherited from his father, Charles V. And remember that the Eastern Habsburg lands were given to Philip's uncle, who becomes Emperor Ferdinand I. Now, Philip, because of the New World and the colonies in the Americas, was getting a steady supply of gold and silver from the mines in Peru, Bolivia, and Mexico. Think about in AP World when we did the DBQ on the silver trade. Despite this constant flow of silver coming in, he was never able to repay his father's debt. He could never fund his own ventures. But what eventually, because banks were still willing to extend credit to him because they knew that he was getting this constant flow of gold and silver, this led to the bankruptcy of one of the largest banking families in Europe called the Fuggers, and he basically defaulted on all of his loans. However, the wealth that was coming in from the New World did allow Europe's population to triple and then quadruple. And this had some long-term effects that actually weren't so good. First thing, an increased wealth and population led to a lot of inflation. Just also the fact that Spain in general really wasn't producing anything, so the money was just coming in and flowing back out of Spain to buy manufactured goods from other countries. In addition, the issue that you're just putting more money into circulation, so more money into circulation is always going to mean that the money's going to have less value. So because of the increase in population, there was less food, there was fewer jobs, wages began to become stagnant, while at the same time prices were doubling and then prices were tripling. So the Spanish peasants were the most heavily taxed in all of Europe. The government, Philip II, ruled through the bureaucracy and ruled through the military. Now remember, he was also a recluse who never really left his palace at Escorial. So he ruled through like pen and paper, basically. So he was in close contact with all the people he trusted to rule for him, but he really wasn't leaving his palace, which remember was a church, a tomb, and a monastery. Now, in the 1560s, the Turks were advancing into Austria. The Ottoman Turks were trying to expand. And Spain kind of takes the charge as the role of the champion against Islam, especially since Philip II is so devoutly Catholic. So this is going to lead to a large showdown between the Spanish and the Turks. So the Turkish fleets were basically dominating the Eastern Mediterranean. But on October 7th, 1571, Don Juan, yes, that's true, Don Juan of Austria, who was Philip II's illegitimate brother, led a holy league of Spain, Venice, and the Pope, and this defeated the Turks. This was the largest naval battle in the 16th century. It's known as the Battle of Lepanto, because basically the Spanish and Austrian fleet engages the Ali Pasha's fleet of the Ottoman Empire off Lepanto in the Gulf of Corinth, which is near Greece. As a result of this, the Spanish gained control of the Mediterranean. A third of the Turkish fleet was captured. 30,000 Turks died. It put down, and in addition to this, Philip II also put down a revolt in Portugal, and he annexes Portugal in 1580. So we have here, first of all, let's just look at this picture for a moment of the Battle of Lepanto, because I think it's interesting. Because you'll see at the bottom of the painting, you see this massive naval battle. But then here at the top, you see, Mary and the saints and angels, kind of like very happily, like, not happy, but like, looking up to, I believe it's probably Mary who they're all looking up to. But like the light of heaven is shining down, meaning that like, God approved of the outcome of this battle, which led to a Turkish Ottoman defeat. So I don't know what actually that's a picture of, so we'll move on. So basically for Spain, we have kind of a mixed bag. A mixed bag in that, you know, they're gaining land in Portugal, they're gaining more power in the Mediterranean, but economically they are a disaster. And inflation and bankruptcy, and they're just really not doing what they need to be doing to producing anything of any worth. The Spanish nobles have a very strong aversion to work. To work in Spain is considered uncultured, so there really isn't, it's very small middle class, partly because they kicked them all out with the, I can't even think right now, I'm sorry. They kicked all the Spanish. When the Spanish kicked out all the Muslims and the Jews during the Reconquista, they essentially kicked out their middle class, so they never really recover a large, vibrant middle class, and that also kind of puts them behind the rest of Europe. So what we're going to talk about next is England. And the reason why we're going to talk about England is because England and Spain are going to have a pretty big showdown during this time period. So the second question, even though I don't have it on a slide, is how did Elizabeth I rule England? But we have to get a little bit to Elizabeth I before we can actually talk about that. But how did Elizabeth I rule England? So here, where we left off with England, Henry VIII, had his 6 wives. He dies. His son Edward VI rules as king. So Edward VI does not rule for very long, 1547 to 1553. He was sickly with tuberculosis. He was a young king. He doesn't last very long. This creates a problem for England because do they bring in Mary, who's the rightful heir? She's the next oldest Tudor, but that would mean bringing England back to Catholicism. So some Protestant nobles within England preferred to have Lady Jane Grey become Queen of England. Now, Lady Jane Grey, which I learned from Natalia and her family tree of the Tudors and Stuarts that she made, so thank you very much. Lady Jane Grey is a cousin of Mary and Elizabeth through their father Henry's sister Mary and her second husband. So some people believe that Lady Jane Grey should rule England. And she was basically a very pious young, she was 16, a very pious young Protestant girl who was basically manipulated by her parents, thrown into this position as queen. She really didn't particularly want to have this position as queen. She lasts for 6 weeks, not even 6 weeks, lasts for 9 days, so not even 2 weeks, sorry. And basically is arrested because the English people, even if not everyone was so anxious to have Mary be queen, the English people recognized that Mary was the rightful heir in succession. So Jane is imprisoned, her husband is imprisoned. This is actually etchings in the Tower of London, because she was kept in the Tower of London. They could see the etching of Jane that was made by her husband. And these are some of the other random family shields, family crests that were made by various different prisoners when they were held in the Tower of London. She is executed. This is a later painting. This is a romantic painting of Lady Jane Grey, but she was executed. And she really kind of, like I said, is kind of like a victim of her family. So Mary, the rightful queen, comes to the throne, Mary I, known as Bloody Mary. This is Mary Tudor. She is going to rule also for not a very long time. Remember, she had a very sad life, being kept from her mother, her father abandoning her. She marries her cousin Philip II, who was considered to be very handsome at the time and quite the catch. And there's Philip II and Mary Tudor. But he was much younger than her, and he really didn't want to have much to do with her. The relationship wasn't very good, even though Mary loved him very much. She really had this desire to bring England back to the Catholic Church, and she very vehemently went after Protestants, which is how she got the name Bloody Mary. It's actually not that many people that she executed. It's around 220 people. Well, I guess it's a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that many people that she had executed for being Protestant. And actually what it did is it actually helped to raise the prestige of Protestantism, because these people went to their death as martyrs, not being willing to give up their faith. And so that actually kind of boosted the reputation of the Protestants in England, at least. So that does take us to this question: how did Mary How did Elizabeth I rule England? So Elizabeth I is going to take power when her sister dies. Her sister dies, as I have on here, in 1558, basically of stomach cancer. So Elizabeth becomes the Queen of England. She's going to rule from 1558 to 1603. So she's going to have a considerably longer reign than either of her siblings. She tried to mend the religious problems of her sister. She tried to heal all the problems that her sister created. In 1559, she's going to reinstate the Act of Supremacy that her father had put in place. She repealed all the anti-Protestant legislation. She reasserted her role as the supreme governor over the church. She also instituted something called the Act of Uniformity, which mandated a Book of Common Prayer that was going to be basically the official prayer book for the country. This put forth the idea of moderate Protestantism being the official religion. One of Elizabeth's more famous quotes is, "I have no window into man's souls." So her basic idea was, as long as you respect me as queen and don't try to overthrow my power, whatever religion you practice in your heart and in secret, that's fine by her, but outwardly you need to be a loyal Protestant. But if you're not in real life, she's really not going to go after you as long as you are loyal to her. Catholic extremists and Jesuits hated her and plotted against her at every chance they could, because many of them wanted her to marry Philip II. Remember, I said Philip II was trying to kind of make an arrangements with her prior to Mary even dying. They wanted her to marry Philip II. She obviously never does. She uses the possibility of marriage to her advantage. Her major advisor is Sir William Cecil, who kind of helps her rule. Another one of her major advisors and very close friends was a man named Sir Robert Dudley. Sir Robert Dudley grew up with her. Some say they had a love affair. However, he was married. Some didn't like Robert Dudley. They felt he had too much power over her. When he marries, there becomes rumors that maybe if he gets rid of his wife, that Elizabeth would marry him. His wife dies under mysterious circumstances, like from a fall down the stairs. So whether he killed her or not, I do not know. But it makes it impossible for Elizabeth. If she ever had intentions of marrying him, they are completely impossible after this event with his wife and this suspicious death of the wife. So she basically uses marriage to her diplomatic advantage. I don't know if she ever would have married Sir Robert Dudley had she had the chance anyway. The Catholics and the Catholics in England and Jesuits wanted her then to replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, Mary, Queen of Scots, of course, is her cousin. So Mary, Queen of Scots was Queen of Scotland. That's actually not a picture of Mary, Queen of Scots. That's actually Elizabeth. I thought I had a picture of Mary. Well, I'll show you a picture of Mary later. That's actually Elizabeth. But getting back to what I was saying, so they wanted to replace her with her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, which she also manages to dodge. Overall, though, in her reign, 45 years long, she executed fewer Catholics in 45 years than her sister did in 5 years. Because again, as long as you were willing to accept her as queen, she wasn't going to go after you. Meanwhile, because she wasn't converting back to Catholicism, she was holding true to Protestantism, she basically had really bad relationships with Spain, probably because she didn't want to marry Philip II. So her relationship with Spain was deteriorating. I talked the other day about the Duke of Alba marching into the Netherlands. When the Duke of Alba, under the orders of Philip II, start going very aggressively after the Dutch Protestants, the Netherlands is not very far from England, and there was fear that there would be a Spanish invasion. As a result of that, we start to see some ramping up of tensions between the two sides. So we have a group called the Sea Beggars. They were basically pirates, but they were kind of like official pirates. They occupied a port city in the Netherlands and were helping to actually stir up the people against the Spanish. Pope Pius V is going to excommunicate Elizabeth, which she could really care less about because she's Protestant, but he's going to excommunicate Elizabeth and favor and openly support a military conquest of England. So the Pope was encouraging international resistance and international intrigue against her. the issue for England is the majority of England is in fact Catholic. And England realized that they were in a very precarious situation because Spain was very powerful, did have a large navy. So England actually makes a mutual defense pact with France. And France, even though England's Protestant and France is Catholic, they're willing to make this pact because they also feared Spain because of what we were talking about with the French Civil War. So while this is all going on, though, her sea dogs, led by, in particular, this man here, Sir Francis Drake, were attacking Spanish ships coming from the Americas. Supposedly, Elizabeth knew nothing about it, and Elizabeth was like, no, this is so wrong, Spain, I'm so sorry that these pirates are attacking your ships. But then she goes behind, she doesn't go, but she then goes and knights Francis Drake. So even though it's like, please, Francis Drake, you're very bad, don't go after the Spanish, and then she knights him. So the Spanish didn't kind of believe that she was not involved in that. So Drake was traveling around the world between 1577 and 1580 and basically showing England's rise to power. Another thing that kind of led to some of the tensions between Spain and England was the St. Bartholomew Day Massacre, because really then England is seen as the only protector of Protestants in France, in the Netherlands. They begin to send cavalry to the Netherlands, soldiers to the Netherlands, and they begin openly supporting Henry of Navarre, which, remember, would tick off Spain because Spain was supporting the Catholic League. So that takes us to this question. How did Mary, Queen of Scots, challenge Elizabeth's rule? So here, of course, is Margaret Tudor, the wife of James IV of Scotland, sister of Henry VIII, and grandmother to Mary Stuart. This is James IV of Scotland. These are Mary's parents, James V of Scotland and Mary of Guise. Another image of James V and Mary of Guise. So that's Mary, Queen of Scots. That's the Palace of Holyrood House that I was telling about in class. It was at the bottom of the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. This is her second husband, Henry Stuart, Lord Darling. Yes, one of her cousins. Distant cousin. So that's a picture of the two of them together. So Mary had an unblemished claim to the throne, unlike Elizabeth, because Elizabeth had been declared illegitimate by her father. Mary didn't have any of those problems. So she actually, by some people's views, had a better line to the throne. Now, if you remember, she lived in France from a young age, had been married to Francis II, comes back to Scotland after her husband dies in 1561. Now, she has a pretty rough time as Queen of Scotland. First off, she's seen as being very French. She speaks French. She doesn't speak Gaelic. She's devoutly Catholic, and Scotland was a Protestant country. And Protestantism under the Treaty of Edinburgh actually had legal status. John Knox, who I talked about today in class, who wrote that book, The Trumpet Blast Against Women, made sure that Mary was not going to turn Scotland Catholic. So basically, he was like her watchdog. So she marries Lord Darling. They have one child named, can we guess, James. But in 1568, she is forced to abdicate because her husband dies under strange circumstances, and she very quickly marries this man, the Earl of Bothwell, who was suspected of murdering her husband. So out of the scandal, she was forced to abdicate her throne. She abdicates the throne. Her 1-year-old son, James, becomes king. So now James is king. She basically has to flee to England. So she fled to England, but this was a problem. This is James Stuart, by the way, Earl of Moray, the half-brother of Mary, who is the regent to James VI, and he was assassinated, but the assassin was basically paid off by Mary. So Mary basically spends her time in England under house arrest, being moved around to various different castles in England, in northern England. She presents a problem for Elizabeth because this is an international symbol of a possible Catholic England again. So the Spanish are in cahoots with her, kind of trying to finagle a way to get her onto the throne. She's under house arrest for 19 years. During those 19 years, multiple attempts of her to push Elizabeth off the throne were uncovered. In particular, there was one in 1583 involving the Spanish ambassador. There was another one in 1586. And basically, Elizabeth felt that she had no other choice because she saw Mary as a threat to her throne, her position on the throne. And Elizabeth, after never meeting her cousin, after her living in England for 19 years, has her executed on February 18th, 1587. And so there's Mary going to her execution. She's there wearing a black dress, but you could see there's a little bit of red because supposedly before she went to her execution, she took off the black robe. She was wearing red, which was the color of martyrdom, because she felt that she was a martyr to the Catholic faith. So there she is being executed. And that's a miniature of James the First, or James the Sixth. So he's James the Sixth of Scotland. He's eventually become James the First of England. So this ended the hope of a peaceful transition of England back to Catholicism. At this point, Pope Sixtus V gave his support for a Spanish invasion of England. He's like, look, there's no way we're getting England back into the Catholic Church without an invasion. So some more pictures of James. We'll talk about James more at a later date. But one thing he did have done, which I thought was interesting, was that when he eventually does become King of England, he has his mother's body moved and put in Westminster Cathedral right across from Elizabeth's tomb. All right, so the last question. I'm sorry this is going on for so long. How did the Spanish Armada weaken the power of Spain? So, Sir Francis Drake is causing all sorts of problems for the Spanish. In 1587, he shells the port city of Cadiz, damages a whole bunch of Spanish ships, forces them to postpone their invasion, because by this point the Spanish were already plotting an invasion of England. So, on May 30th, 1588, a fleet of 130 ships carrying 25,000 sailors and soldiers launched themselves on attack on England. The English ships were smaller. The English ships were faster. They were able to disperse the Spanish fleet, besides the fact that there was a couple of really well-timed storms that also kind of diminished a lot of the Spanish fleet. So Elizabeth gains a great deal of prestige as a result of this, because the Spanish are humiliated, and really Spain never really recovers from this defeat. But I just want to put here, this is the speech that Elizabeth makes as she's talking to her men before they're going off and fighting in the Spanish Armada. And she says, "My loving people, we have been persuaded by some that are careful of our safety to take heed how we commit ourselves to armed multitudes for fear of treachery. But I assure you, I do not desire to live to distrust my faithful and loving people. Let tyrants fear. I have always so behaved myself that under God I have placed my chiefest strength and safeguard in the loyal hearts and goodwill of my subjects. And therefore I come amongst you, as you see at this time, not for my recreation and disport, but being resolved, in the midst and the heat of battle, to live or die amongst you all, to lay down my life for my God and for my kingdom and for my people, my honor and my blood, even in the dust. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too. And I think foul scorn that Parma or Spain or any other prince of Europe should dare to invade the borders of my realm, the which, rather than any dishonor shall grow by me, I myself will take up arms. I myself will be your general, judge, and rewarder of every one of your virtues in the field. I know already for your forwardness you have deserved rewards and crowns, and we do assure you in the word of a prince they shall be duly paid to you. In the meantime, my lieutenant general shall be in my stead, than whom never prince commanded a more noble or worthy subject, not doubting but by your obedience to my general, but by your concord in the camp and your valor in the field, we shall shortly have a famous victory over these enemies of my God, of my kingdom, and of my people." Notice how she refers to herself as a man the whole time. She's doing that purposefully. So the Spanish Armada, huge, massive defeat for the Spanish. And then on their way back, they then had another huge storm that they encountered, and a lot of the ships were shipwrecked off the coast of Ireland. That's actually the spot in Ireland where some of the ships were found. There's me and two of my friends on the spot where the Spanish Armada crashed. And here is Elizabeth. I like this painting because you see like bright sunny skies on one side and like the destruction of the Spanish Armada on the other side. And now Elizabeth has her hand on the globe, because this really marks the rise of England. Well, really, France rises as a new power. France becomes the major new power in Europe, but it marks an upswing for England as well. And on March 23rd, Elizabeth dies. March 23rd, 1603, Elizabeth dies, and England was really poised to become a major global power in the world. So What could have Philip have done to possibly maintain his position in Europe? I want you to think about that, and I'll see you guys in class.